Your party has been adventuring for a long time. They've come across plenty of challenges, fought monsters that no other party should fight, and come across magic items to help in their journey. There's one left, and your contact has recently found the location of it. However, it doesn't seem like they're very happy about it. As you approach their table, they look up at you, still frowning, and you smile and say, "Well, have you found out where the item is? Is it in a dungeon? Because we can handle those. Or is it being guarded by a cabal of mages that don't want the artifact getting into the outside world, whether into the hands of good or evil?" Your contact shakes his head and says, "No, it's even worse than that. It's in the Blob of Annihilation." Hello, my name is Monster Half-Life, and we are looking at the Blob of Annihilation today. A creature of pure malice, this thing only wants death and destruction in its wake. And it's a very good creature to achieve that with, as the only things that can survive for any amount of time in its gullet is magic items and the corpses of gods and titans. Now, either fortunately or unfortunately for your party, this tends to attract a lot of treasure hunters, as, well, they see the magic items floating around in this blob of destruction, and they want a piece of that pie. So, this creature is not just a big sack of hit points that is trying to kill your party, but it's also a puzzle. As we'll see later, why. But it makes the party try to prioritize three things. How much collateral damage do they want this thing to do? How many magic items do they want to try and get out of this thing before it dies? Or if they want to try and kill this thing as quickly as possible. But without further ado, I present Monster Half-Life's Guide to Running the Blob of Annihilation. The Blob of Annihilation is nothing to sneeze at. At a CR 23, this thing really hurts when you fight it. With 448 HP, an 18 armor class, and a plus 16 to initiative, this thing is, well, not that hard to hit at the level that you get it at, but it's strong enough to be able to take damage, and it's fast enough to be able to pretty much go first overall during most combats. It's resistant to any bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. Doesn't matter if it's magical or not, so your weapons are going to be less effective against this thing. It's immune to necrotic, poison, and acid damage, so don't even bother with necromancy spells most of the time. As for condition immunities, the better question is not to ask what it is immune to. The better question is to ask what it's not immune to. And as far as I'm aware, unless I'm forgetting anything, the only three things it's not immune to is blindness, deafness, and incapacitated. Blindness and deafness are probably going to be pretty useless against this thing, as it has a blind sight out to 120 feet. So the only thing that you can really do against this thing is incapacitate it. And that means you're probably not going to be able to stop it in its tracks. Its stats are nothing to sneeze at either. It uses its strength score to attack, and it has a strength score of 27, which is insane. It also has a constitution score of 28, and its other stats are a little less impressive. It has a 14 dexterity, a 16 wisdom, and an intelligence and charisma, both of 10. It is also proficient in dexterity and constitution saving throws, buffing that up to a plus 9 to their dexterity and a plus 16 to their constitution saves. If that's not bad enough, they also get magic resistance, which gives them advantage against any spell or other magical effects. And, as a last resort, they also get legendary resistance, which means that if they fail a saving throw, they can choose to succeed it instead. Now, they do have a limited use of these, but unlike most boss monsters, they get 4 a day. Most boss monsters get 3. The Blob of Annihilation has 3 attack choices it can choose from, and with its multi-attack, it can attack 3 times, effectively. It can use 2 pseudopod attacks and the engulf action, and you can replace any one of these attacks with the use of Restraining Glob. Though, personally, I would recommend only replacing one of the pseudopod attacks with Restraining Glob, as engulf is stupidly useful. Going to the pseudopod, it has a 30-foot reach, so it is a ranged attack disguised as a melee attack, basically. It does 3d10 plus 8 force damage per hit, and it has a plus 15 to hit. So it's most likely going to be doing this damage no matter what, unless your party has managed to get some pretty insane armor by the time that they fight this thing. But it's probably the least useful attack. While it does a lot of damage, it doesn't do anything else. And the other effects of the other 2 actions, both Engulf and Restraining Glob, more than make up for the lessened damage that they do. Engulf lets you move 30 feet through enemy spaces, which is on top of the 30 feet that they could already move. So it basically gives you 60 feet of movement per round. If you go through an opponent's space, they have to make a DC 23 strength saving throw, or they get engulfed. While they're engulfed, they have total cover, which means that nothing on the outside can get to them, whether that be a fireball that your wizard throws out in a desperate attempt to kill this thing, or healing that a cleric might do, as both can't get through total cover. While you're engulfed, you take 6d6 force damage per turn, you're suffocating, and you're restrained. And that's not the worst part of it. The worst part is that if you're reduced to 0 hit points while you're engulfed, you get turned to ash and then ejected into the astral sea. That really sucks. Obviously. But the bright side of this is that any character that's engulfed can make a strength saving throw at the end of each of their turns to try and get out of this thing. Not to mention that restrained doesn't mean that you still can't attack, you're just attacking at disadvantage. Lastly, we have Restraining Glob, and this is their actual ranged option. Why do I say it's their actual ranged option? 30 feet with a pseudopod is pretty far. Well, that's because the Restraining Glob has a range of 600 feet. You heard me right. 600 feet. They can hit you with this thing across town. It's a dexterity saving throw of 23, and if you fail it, you are restrained and pulled 60 feet towards the Blob of Annihilation, and you take 3d6 plus 8 acid damage. Now, being fair, the blob will wear off at the end of your next turn, not to mention that if you succeed, you only take the half damage. But Restraining Glob is still a terrific battlefield control option if you're trying to get people who are just sniping you to get closer to you. Not to mention that it pairs really well with Engulf, as you can pull people closer and then use Engulf to, well, engulf them. The Blob of Annihilation gets 3 legendary actions, and unlike most boss monsters, each of the legendary actions actually only costs 1 legendary action. However, Decay and Grasping Glob can only be used once per round, so you're most likely going to be cycling through each of the legendary actions instead of, spamming the same one 3 times. Decay lets you do 4d6 necrotic damage to each creature that's already engulfed by the Blob of Annihilation, which means that they're not only taking the 66 force damage per round that they get when they're engulfed, but they also are taking 4d6 necrotic damage while they're engulfed. So, again, Your players are going to be dying very, very fast unless you can get them out of there, which is your goal, but it's not your party's goal. Grasping Glob lets you use Restraining Glob once per round. Now, this is outside of the attack that you're able to do during your turn, so basically you can either pull someone 120 feet if they fail to save twice, or you can pull 2 people 60 feet per round. Not to mention the 3d6 plus 8 acid damage on each glob is still pretty good. Not to mention they're restrained for a round. So, not a bad attack. Lastly is Lashing Goop. This one you can use over and over again, but it's also the most boring, as it lets you use one pseudopod attack. It's okay, right? Like I said, the pseudopod's very boring when it comes to what it can do, but it does a lot of damage. So, if you can't use Decay, or you've used both Decay and Grasping Glob, Lashing Goop is a good last legendary action to use it on. The Blob of Annihilation is not a mindless beast. Now, you may be mistaken into thinking that because a lot of oozes, well, most oozes actually, are mindless beasts. They just kind of eat. And the description doesn't really help that. But looking at their stats, they have an intelligence of 10. They're not a genius of sorts, but they're as smart as the average commoner. So that would mean that they can make decisions that seem reasonable, right? They can find people who are hurting them more, and they'll probably go after those people just to get them to stop hurting them. They have 3 attacks, like I said before, and the order that I would go in would be Restraining Glob first to get that pesky mage or ranger closer, because you want to set them up for Engulf later in the turn. Next, I would use a pseudopod attack just to weaken someone who's close to you, and quotes close, right? Because the range is 30 feet. You can hit anyone within 30 feet of you. That lastly, I would use Engulf, because you want to try and get as many people in this Engulf as humanly possible, because the more people you get, the more damage you do. Lastly, for legendary actions, you're probably going to want to cycle through them depending on the order that your party's in. You can use Lashing Goop like pretty much any time. It's just a pseudopod attack. You don't really have to be super strategic about it. Decay, it's going to very much depend on how many people you've got inside you. If you've got a lot of people inside your Engulf, you want to use it as soon as possible before people start breaking out. But if you got like 1 or 2, you could probably save it towards the end. The one I would definitely save towards the end is Grasping Glob, as that lets you use Restraining Glob, and you want to get the person you use it on closer to you, as close to your turn as possible, so you can then use Engulf on them as soon as possible after that. As for where you're fighting them, you're not going to be fighting this thing in a dungeon, unless you really underestimated the size of this thing. Looking at the art, it's the size of a building. So you don't want to be fighting this thing inside a dungeon. Where you're most likely going to put it is in a town, as maybe it comes down in a meteor during some freak accident, or maybe some cult summons it and you're trying to stop it. But either way, your players are going to want to use the buildings as cover. And so that means that the blob is going to want to start destroying these buildings as cover. It's a puzzle, basically. Your players are trying to figure out how to contain and stop this thing, while also losing more and more of the cover that's keeping them safe. This monster is tough enough. You can put any damn thing you want in this thing. as long as it's a magic item, of course. Whether that be a Holy Avenger or a Robe of the Magi, or maybe even like an artifact like the Hand of Vecna or the Orb of Dragonkind. But truthfully, it does have an ability that makes it a bit harder to get these items than most creatures. The Astral Implosion ability makes sure that when the blob is reduced to 0 HP, it ejects any objects that are engulfed by it into the Astral Sea. So that makes it a lot harder for the players to get those magic items. But that also turns the boss into a puzzle. The question becomes, how are we going to get these magic items? Are we going to try and find a way to get it while the creature is alive and basically draw it out while the party distracts them? Or are we going to try and put some sort of tracker on them? Track them through the Astral Sea and go on another little adventure to get them. Either way, this opens up possibilities for your players. And that's what I really like about this monster. It's a puzzle and it doesn't really have any one solution. Your players and you get to figure out how they're going to solve this problem. And that's something that I think is great monster design. Also, do not come up with one solution. Do not tell your players that that is the only solution, because it's not, and you want your players to be creative about it. Lastly, this monster reappears once every 1 to 20 years on a random world in the material plane. So it's not going to be dead for long. And so if your players miss a chance to get a magic item from it, if you end up continuing in-game for a couple years, maybe you can have it spawn back and they can try it again. But that's just me. In conclusion, this creature, the Blob of Annihilation, is a very powerful new boss that was introduced. I think it was one of the better new bosses that was introduced in the Monster Manual, simply because of the puzzle aspect of trying to get the magic items out of this thing and into your hands. Would I have this thing be a big bad evil guy or a final boss? Probably not. Because this whole thing's whole gimmick is that it has magic items inside it. So if you get the magic items out of it, but it's the last boss or enemy of the game, well, that kind of sucks. You know? You never get to use the magic items that you worked so hard to get, because that's the end of the campaign. Instead, I would have it be the final obstacle before the big bad evil guy. Either to get the last artifact that's needed to defeat him, or as a mega goon, right? Or a mega minion, almost. It shows how powerful your big bad evil guy is, that it can control this thing, or it gives your players a sense of confidence in what they're coming up against because they survived the Blob of Annihilation. But either way, it's an accomplishment for your players if they're able to beat this thing, and it's an accomplishment as a DM if you're able to run this thing correctly. So, keep an eye out, and make sure that this thing doesn't touch any of your furniture, as you're never going to see it again if it does.